Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Queeries. We're here for part two, talking about the Gall family and parenting and what happened. And if you recall, just briefly from last episode, they were talking about how their son had graduated from Beaver Creek High School, was excited, and was on his way to Indianapolis to fulfill his dream of working in aviation, in this case, aviation mechanics. So welcome back for part two, and we'll continue on. So he was excited. He graduated. Mm-hmm. He's got his feet planted, ready to go to Indianapolis to fulfill his dreams. So how did that make you feel? When the time came for him to go to Indianapolis?
We were super excited for Cody to go, and a little sad, like all parents are when the birds leave the nest, and
Right.
and we were, just like I said, happy and excited and sad all at the same time. Cody, we moved Cody over into Indianapolis. We were super happy that he was going to Indy because it was close enough for him to come back to Dayton whenever he wanted, and for us to go there, and for us to still see each other. And so, when Cody got there, he was obviously, a little depressed, first time away from home, just a little sad, didn't have really any friends over there. Started his job a month before he started his school. We had been there a couple of different times to, check out the school, get him registered, and explore Indianapolis and to look for apartments and things like that. So we had been there several times, and so we moved him up there in March of last year, like Deb said, and got him settled up there, and just decided, Cody, just call us whenever you need us. We had a year prior turned his diabetes pretty much over to him and said, Cody, you're 17 now. You need to learn. You've had diabetes for 2 years now. So you've seen how we've handled it. We've taught you several times how to count carbs. He had a little carb book counter. He had a little digital scale. He had, his meter. And we had tried, he tried one of those blood glucose monitors that stay like on your body so that he wouldn't have to do the finger pricks so often. But he just didn't adjust to that very well. And we had actually even talked about getting the insulin pump and all this, and went to his regular doctor's appointments. He went to the doctor every 3 months. He had to get his A1C checked and talk to his doctor about his eating habits and how's it going. And she would check his abdomen make sure that there wasn't too much scar tissues building up from the insulin shots, which is where he took it most of the time. He could take it in the arm too, and occasionally took his insulin in his arm, but she would check his fingers and making sure that they weren't getting too damaged from the finger pricks. And actually found a meter that he could check his blood sugar on his forearm instead of the fingers, so that when his fingers started to get sore, he could do it in other places. So he really did well. We continually reminded him while he was living with us that last year, before he went off to college. We were always, did you check your blood sugar? Like, we'd get ready to sit down for dinner, and he, did you check your sugar? Oh no, I forgot, and he would go and check and take his insulin, and did you count your carbs, all that. So we were still diligent that last year, but when we got ready to move him out, we were like, okay, I want you to call me if you have problems counting carbs, if you have problems deciding how much insulin to take. Stay away from the sugar. Yes, you can have the occasional donut or cookie or piece of cake. Just make sure you treat for it.
Right. That's the one thing with type 1 diabetes that is different than type 2. Type 2, you still need to keep an eye on your carbs and so forth, but type 1 is, I think, more unforgiving because of the carb thing. You'd be surprised. I was shocked by a lot of the different things that actually count as a carb. you know, drinks, corn.
Corn counts
You
as
know, I
carb.
mean, if you ever opened up and really looked at it or really researched it, you'd be really surprised by how much different things can affect a type 1 diabetic. And I know myself and Kathy both, our biggest fear when he went to school was that he wasn't going to take care of his diabetes. That, you know, because we had to constantly remind him, even though we turned it over to him that last year that he was living at home and let him kind of take care of himself, there were still countless times that we had to remind him to check his blood or, you know, do the different things, you know, try to teach him. I took him to the store before he moved several times to teach him what to buy and what not to buy. And if he bought the things he shouldn't buy, then he needed to make sure he read the carbs on the nutrition labels so that he knew how many units he had to give himself. We never deprived Cody of things. We tried to teach him to, as Kathy said earlier, to make sure that he was treating for the things that he ate. You know, a donut, if he ate a donut, which you'll find out in a little while was probably one of his biggest downfalls. He could eat it, that was fine, but he needed to treat for it. You know, and again, that's one of the differences with type 1 versus type 2. You know, type 1, you just really got to keep a close handle on what you're putting into your body. And it got to the point where we were trying to teach him and trying to get that locked into him, and he listened, but you know, he was a teenager.
Right.
So teenagers, they're going in different directions all the time. So
I think they're invincible.
things get lost, and unfortunately, a lot of that happened. You know, he wasn't treated like he should.
And that's partly also, you know, having ADHD as well. I would imagine probably made it that much more difficult for him to sort of concentrate, I guess, on what he should be doing. And then again, you know, teenagers who think that they're absolutely invincible because I am young and, you know, there's nothing that can take me down. So he's off at school. And, you know, I'm assuming that you'd been in communication with him a fair amount, you know, after you left him?
Every week.
Every week?
Yes, every week Cody would either call or text, or we would call and he would text. But he learned, well, we thought he learned his lesson very soon in the beginning. 5 weeks after Cody had moved, he landed in the hospital for the first time. With diabetic ketoacidosis, DKA. He wasn't taking care of his sugars. He was away from home for the first time, you know, probably eating whatever he wanted, I'm sure, because that boy could eat. He was thin. He was extremely thin. Most type 1 diabetics are thin. But he was underweight all his life. But he, I'm sure, like I said, eating whatever he wants. Landed in the hospital for 5 days that first time.
And were you notified by the hospital? Or
Cody called us.
Cody
called us. And
how did you, I mean, what was your initial reaction? I mean,
well,
obviously.
at first I thought he had COVID.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
because that was shortly after.
Because it was right after COVID
Right
hit.
after COVID?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, his breathing was really fast, and he was kind of panicking a little bit and just, you know, just not doing well. So when he called me and told me, I said, Cody, you need to call the ambulance. You know, so he called the ambulance came and took him to the hospital, and thankfully it wasn't COVID, but unfortunately it was, you know, DKA. So.
Were you able to visit him in the hospital?
No,
Not at all.
We wanted to go, but
and he wanted us to come.
Yeah.
He said, Mom, can you come up? And I was like, Cody, we can't.
They weren't allowing.
They weren't allowing
allowing
anyone into the hospital at that
Anybody.
point.
And plus he was in the ICU as well. So it wasn't, just, the typical hospital
Yeah, because
room.
we're talking April of last year, so that was right at the height of the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
And they locked the hospitals down. You weren't allowed in, and we weren't able to go and see him. But he came out of the hospital after 5 days, and he gave us the long speech. Mom, I learned my lesson. I'm not going to, mess around anymore with my diabetes. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to start making sure that I'm treating right, and I'm checking my blood, and I'm doing all that. He admitted to us at that time that he had not been checking as often, and he had not been treating as often as he should. So we had a long talk with him. He actually
Several
came
times.
home. Yeah.
Several talks,
Yeah.
not just
You
one,
know.
several.
And he came home in at the end of May, and he got to participate in the virtual graduation at Beaver Creek, and he was so glad to be home. He couldn't get enough of home when
Sure.
he came home, and he, Mom, he did everything he needed to do when he was home with us. Of course, we had to remind him a couple times to check his blood, but he did pretty well with it.
Yeah.
So we felt good at that time that he was taking care of himself.
Or that at least he was going
he
to
had
start.
learned. We really felt that maybe he had learned his lesson.
So at that point, then, I'm sure that you probably both were, I guess, sort of in a heightened level of awareness when he went back to Indianapolis.
Oh,
And hovering from afar, I'm sure.
Yes.
As far as that goes.
Yeah.
But at that point, you were still confident that hey, lesson learned. He's going to take care of himself.
Yeah.
And 6 weeks later, he landed in the hospital again with DKA again.
Yeah.
This time it was only for 3 days. He wasn't in the ICU. He was in step down, like what they called a step down unit. So not in a regular hospital room, but not in the ICU. So 3 days, and again, had several talks with him about his diet, things that he was eating, taking his insulin, reminding him to make sure he took his insulin, because he had to carry his insulin with him wherever he went. He had this little small like backpack thing, and insulin is very sensitive to extreme temps, whether it be cold or hot. So we talked to Cody a lot about don't keep your insulin in the car. Take it in with you wherever you go.
Right.
Always have your meter. So in that little bag, he always kept his meter, he always kept his insulin, he always kept supplies, his alcohol swabs and needles and things like that in there. And he had admitted to us the second time that he landed in the hospital that he had left his insulin in the car when he would go to work and leave the insulin in the car. Well, it was probably not working at that point, and we told him, throw that pin away, get a new pin. You have new pins. We were still getting his medications filled here in Ohio because he still had insurance, but it was only good for Ohio. So we were meeting him like every month or every 2 months to give him, his medications and supplies and stuff. Cody had, 2 or 3 different meters. He had he always had
Everything.
his medications. He had lots of supplies with him. So it's not that he didn't have the tools that he needed to take care of his diabetes, but it just wasn't getting through to Cody. And the second time he landed in the hospital, he told us again, Mom, I learned my lesson. I don't like being in the hospital. That second time we could still not go up. It was in May, it was in June. So we still could not go to the hospital and see him. But we were still, like you said, Brian, kind of hovering from afar, calling him, texting him. Don't forget to take your insulin. Did you check your blood? Take your bag into work with you. Things like this. Make sure he always had a snack with him in case his blood sugar dropped, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so his school was really great about allowing him to step out of class and eat a snack if he needed to, or check his blood or whatever. So that second time, you know, a couple months went by and we thought, great, you know, he's got it. He's learned this time, like he said. And December came, and Cody decided, we all decided as a family, that he would come home for about 5 days for Christmas. He had a break from school. He had just gotten a new job in December at a cashier, as a cashier at a gas station. And it was going to be a full-time job with benefits. So we were extremely happy that he had gotten this job. So I had told him when he went for the interview, tell them in the beginning that you're coming home for 5 days for Christmas, that you need that time off. Tell them before they hire you, you know. And so he did. He let them know that he needed that 5 days off. So he came home. Was it the 23rd or the 24th?
It was the 24th.
24th. He came home.
Yeah, we have
for Christmas.
Every Christmas we have a get together at our nephews, and they have 3 children. One is he's 14.
I think.
Yeah,
around there. I'm bad.
And he and Cody,
like brothers.
Carson and Cody were just like brothers. I mean, that was the little brother that Cody needed to have. He actually, in real life, has a brother, but his brother was adopted before Cody.
They lost contact.
Yeah, they didn't have any contact. So anyway, we always had this get together at Christmas time, and Cody had a ball. We had the best Christmas ever. I mean, we really did. And the day before he left, he went to the doctor, and
that was on December 29th.
Yeah, he went to the doctor, and the doctor had done an A1C and a blood sugar count. And just before I get into what those numbers were, one of the things that had kept him in the hospital when he went in, while he was in Indianapolis, was the fact that his sodium levels had dropped so much. When you have diabetic ketoacidosis, it affects your sodium levels. And you have to be careful, because if those sodium levels can drop too low, then that's a definite medical emergency in itself. So that's what kept him in the hospital for an extended period of time, because they could never get his sodium levels back to where they needed to be. But getting back to Christmas, a normal A1C is typically 7
or
below. And a typical blood sugar, a good blood sugar, is around 120. His doctor called
the next day,
the next day,
December 30th.
and told us that his A1C was 13.1. His blood sugar was 648, and they wanted him to go to the hospital immediately. Well, he was already over in Indianapolis, and we tried to call him and couldn't get a hold of him. Working this new job, he was working 3rd shift, and he was going to school 1st shift. So basically, we knew when he got done with school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he was probably going home and going to bed, because he had to be up and be at his work by 11. So we tried to figure out the best time to call, and we tried different times, and finally got a hold of him. And we told him, we had a long discussion with him, and a lot of tears were shed, and a lot of difficult conversation about him needing to go to the hospital. He needed to go because he had to get treated. Something was way off. He needed to do something. Well, having been in the hospital those previous times, of course, he had medical bills. And everyone out there can associate with medical bills. They can mount up very quickly, especially when you have an in-the-hospital stay. So that was concerning him, that he had those huge bills. So during the conversation, he said, "Mom, I can't go to the hospital." And we both said, we had him on speakerphone, and we both said about at the same time, "Son, you have to go to the hospital. You can't not go. You have to go.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter how much it costs. It doesn't matter about that. You matter."
And he just continued to say,
I can't afford it.
you know, "I can't afford this, Mom." And then I told him, we both told him, "Cody, you can't afford not to go.
Right.
Your health is more important. You know, ultimately you are an adult. This is your choice, but you need to go to the hospital."
We begged him.
We begged him. We were on the phone with him over an hour that day, and there were lots of, like Deb said, Deb was crying. I mean, she even said to Cody, "We don't want to lose our son."
Mm-hmm.
The last thing we want to do is bury our boy.
And and
It was
this is critical. You know,
Yeah.
we had told Cody several times before that diabetes can kill. But I don't think him or even us had even heard stories of people dying from diabetes. We knew that this is a treatable disease.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
But I think the combination of being fearful about having to pay more medical bills and partially maybe being in a little bit of denial, even though Cody had diabetes for 4 years, and being 19
Invincible.
and thinking that he's invincible, and maybe if he starts to treat tonight, that it will be fine, that he can get it back under control. Unfortunately, when you're in DKA, your body is starting to go into like a diabetic shock of sorts, and can't right itself. I'm not a doctor, at least not a medical doctor, but you know, so I can't explain all the ins and outs of it. But diabetes is a killer.
If you don't take care of yourself, it will unfortunately take your life. And
We
you know,
just-
like Kathy said, we tried to get that through to him that day when we were talking to him and begging him to go to the hospital. You know, I firmly do believe that he just felt like he could, as Kathy said, treat it and make it better. You know, give it a couple days, it'll be better if I take care of myself now. But he didn't. Unfortunately, he didn't take care of what he needed to do. He didn't go to the hospital. That was, again, Kathy said that was the 30th of December. On January 3rd, he was talking to his best friend. He and his best friend talked every single day, either by text or by phone. And his best friend heard from him the last time on January 3rd. He was supposed to start school on January 4th. He did not go to school. He did not contact the school. I'm not sure, we've tried to find out from his employer, the convenience store that he was working at gas station, when his last day of work was.
Well,
We've tried to put together some type of timeline.
We know that
but-
he worked New Year's Eve, and he worked the night of the 1st and 2nd, because the morning of the 2nd, one of his former co-workers had seen him that morning getting coffee.
Right.
Um,
So, you know, the last time that anybody had talked to him was on the 3rd. There would be times where we talked to him every week, like Kathy said, or it might go 9-10 days. So it wasn't unusual for us not to hear from him, but we got concerned. We tried to call him several times, couldn't get a hold of him. So Kathy and I made the decision that we would contact the police department in the town he lived in Indianapolis, to do a wellness check. And they went and did a wellness check. we were sitting at home, Kathy was working at home, and I was in the living room, and a police officer came to our door, and that's the sickest feeling you could ever have. He came to tell us that they had done the wellness check. The Speedway, Indiana Police Department had contacted Beaver Creek to come and tell us that they had found Cody deceased in his apartment. He was sleeping. There was no sign of any trauma. Our reasoning and our way to make it the timeline that we want to understand. When you have the beginnings of DKA, you tend to become confused because your body chemistry is way out of whack. We kind of feel that maybe he woke up on the 4th when he was supposed to go to school, figured that he didn't feel right. He couldn't go to school that day, so he may have laid down to try to go to sleep, and in the confusion, he may have gone to sleep and then went into a diabetic coma and passed.
We found out on the 11th, January 11th, that Cody had passed. Yep. And the coroner thought he had passed about 48 hours prior to that. We will never obviously know the exact day. We feel like he probably went into a coma on the 5th and passed away probably the 7th or the 8th. Typically
it's 48 hours after you go into the coma.
48 to 72 hours.
That you pass.
We recently got the toxicology report back, and they confirmed what we had suspected, that Cody had gone into diabetic coma, that he was in DKA again, and his sodium level dropped critically, obviously, and he passed away.
And this will be a good time to take a quick break. And for any parent, that has to be. I can't even imagine the level of pain and hurt and just trauma of losing a child. And I think you brought a picture of Cody with you.
Yes.
So if you wanted to hold that up.
This was the last picture that we took of Cody at Christmas time.
Holding his baby.
Holding his favorite dog. Her name is Molly. She's a Shih Tzu, and they were extremely close. You're right, Brian. It's our lives will never be the same.
No.
I think that I guess if there's any consolation in this is that you gave this disadvantaged child a loving home. You turned his life around. He brought you equal measures of joy and love and happiness and frustration that any parent goes through. And he was taken way, way before his time.
Yep.
But I think, the fact that he knew that he had a loving family, that, there's not a whole lot more that he could have probably asked for. And this is just the worst. And I think that, for our viewers, that we're going to put in information as far as juvenile diabetes, put up a website for that. And my heart goes out to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. The last thing I just want to say is, if you have diabetes, type 1 or type 2, please take care of yourself. I am type 2 diabetic, and I've been taking care of myself quite a bit more since this has happened. A parent should never have to lose a child. Our lives will be changed forever because of the joy that Cody brought to us.
That's right.
And
If you or a friend or even an enemy has type 1 diabetes, please tell them this story. Please take care of yourself. Take care of your loved ones. Hug your kids a little bit more. Hug your loved ones a little bit more, because time is too short. 19 years old and gone. Life's too short.
Thank you so much for sharing this undeniably painful story. And thank you for watching, and please take care of yourselves, take care of your kids, and we'll see you next week.